one right now, but I know that others are. It's 24.5 minutes past 9. Children in divorce cases should have automatic access to their grandparents, so say campaigners, worried that contact can be lost. Current law allows extended family to apply to the courts for access if one or both parents shut them out. While the rules differ in Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland, no part of the UK allows automatic access rights to extended family. The campaign for a change is backed by Dame Esther Ranson, who's here live, after we hear of just one case. Jane Jackson lost contact with her granddaughter for 11 years, and she blamed the breakup of the girl's parents.
We had a really good relationship. She was our first granddaughter and our only granddaughter. And for 7 years we were part of her life, and we had an amazing, magical time. It's such a privilege to be a grandparent.
Were you, excuse me for being so rude so early on, were you a soppy grandmother?
Yeah, of course. Is there anything else?
Is it fair to say you thought you were a better grandparent than you were a parent at first?
Being a parent and being a grandparent, you learn on the job. And so, it's a completely different relationship, and it is a unique relationship. And so I can only describe it the first time that I picked her up, this tiny little bundle of marvellousness, that I sort of fell in love all over again. But it is completely different from being a parent. Mm.
And it came to an end, that 7-year relationship?
Yeah, overnight. It was there 1 minute, and she was collecting Easter eggs from the Easter Bunny in my back garden, and that was the last time we saw her for 11 years.
11 years?
Yeah.
Can it be compared to a death?
Yes, and we call it a living bereavement, and it's the only way to describe it. But of course, you're grieving someone who's still very much alive, but you also go through all the different stages of grief as you do when you lose somebody.
Did she send you a birthday or Christmas card?
No, there was nothing. I mean, when it first happened, I wrote several times and obviously sent her birthday cards and birthday presents and Christmas, which we did right up until last year, in fact. But either cards and letters were returned, or I just didn't know whether she was getting them or not.
Do you have rights if you apply to the court? Did you consider going to the court to get access rights, which you are allowed under the current law?
Well, a grandparent doesn't have an automatic legal right to go to court for a child arrangement order, but you apply to the court for something called leave, which is another word for permission to then move on to the next stage to apply for an order. But we decided with my son equally that actually our granddaughter had such a lot that she was trying to come to terms with in her own life, and we were afraid to make it worse for her. And so he decided to back off, and we did too, from a legal aspect.
11 years went by, and then something happened.
Yeah, it certainly did. I had a phone call from my son one afternoon, and he was very tearful. And he said, "I've just heard from your granddaughter." And I didn't know what he meant. That sounds ridiculous, but I just didn't. And, clearly I realised exactly what was going on at that point. And she had contacted him via Instagram. And that was the beginning of us being reunited.
When were you?
Well, my son went straight up to see her, and I kept in the background. I didn't do anything, and I just waited until it seemed an appropriate time, and I asked him whether he thought it would be okay if I actually messaged her via Instagram, and he said, "I think that would be fine." And so I did, and held my breath, and I had an instant response from her, and I cannot put into words how that felt. It was just amazing. I think I probably stopped breathing for a moment. I cried. I shook. Every emotion you can think of just fizzes to the surface. So the emotions that you've been actually burying for 11 years come to the surface, and it was just extraordinary. And I just said, "We've thought about you every day. We never stop loving you." And the response was, "And I love you too, Grandma."
Could you compare that feeling on that Instagram message to the moment you described when you held her as a newborn?
Yes, it was the same thing. And it was a it's just really difficult. It's such an emotional thing, and as you can probably tell by my voice, still is. And you're so aware that you have to be so very careful. It's a very fragile thing. And so you begin this journey of rebuilding a relationship, clearly a completely different relationship. She was 7 when we last saw her. She was 17 when she came back into our lives last May. And so, the little girl that once ran up my garden path is now a young woman.
Jane Jackson, who runs the Bristol Grandparents Support Group, which is supported by Dame Esther Ranson. And Esther's here on our programme again. Hello.
Hello, you've reduced me to tears completely.
Well, we didn't seek to do that. So if we just take a moment, how widespread is the reaction from listeners and viewers when this subject is mentioned? Can we start there?
Yes, well, I mentioned it on the One Show, and I've brought, just to show you, Paddy, the 250 letters that I got in reply. And, of course, what I'm looking at it, from the point of view that I'm looking at it, is from the child. Because I've got here, I brought with me some of the quotations from grandchildren who deeply regret the fact that they can no longer stay in touch with the grandparents they adored, can't even go when they know their grandparents are dying, can't even go to their deathbeds to say a last goodbye, can't go to their funerals, are prevented from all contact. One of the things that Jane sent me was a text she'd had from Leandra, her granddaughter, who said, "Years ago you sent me a fairy for the Christmas tree and I put it on the tree every year." So they hold the faith, these grandchildren. They cherish those memories.
Breakups can work. Many friends we all have came from separated homes through bereavement, through divorce, and many grandparents keep access. In the bulk of cases, you can bring up children with an extended family. There is not a snafu. So whilst we're talking about this, pay tribute to all the families who managed to bring up children fabulously despite a breakup.
Absolutely. If you put the children first, if you put the interest of the children first, you know that the last thing they want is the bitterness and hatred. But when children have been told for year after year after year that the grandparents don't care about them, never loved them, have ceased to exist, it cannot help but affect the child's attitude.
And what is the change that would make a difference, do you think?
I'm desperately trying not to sniff on Radio 4 because the tears now are making their way down my nose. And I don't suppose anybody's got a tissue, have they? I'll tell you what I'll do. I know it's not Radio 4, but I will wipe my nose on my sleeve. I'm sorry about that.
Right. I mean, the thing is, we can certainly... Look, I'll tell you what we'll do.
A change of law, yes.
I'll give you a moment, Esther.
All right,
because
thank you.
We've looked out a moment from the Justice Minister, Lucy Fraser. She was saying that grandparents do not usually experience difficulty in obtaining permission with their application to the courts.
The leave requirement isn't designed to be an obstacle to grandparents or other family members. What it's meant to be is a filter to sift out applications that are clearly not in a child's best interests. For example, vexatious applications aimed at undermining one of the parents involved in a dispute over the child or continuing parental conflict.
OK, Esther, so during that time you've been able to just get back in touch. And the leave requirement, this is how grandparents or wider family would go to the courts.
Yes.
And you want it to be made automatic.
I do. The French law gives grandchildren the legal right to contact with their extended family, especially grandparents. That is all we're asking. Now, obviously, the court will decide whether it's in the interests of the children, and if there's any evidence that there's been any abuse or other reasons, other factors which get in the way, of course the court will decide that. But what we want to avoid is a situation where grandparents may spend thousands of pounds, but not, and I've got evidence in my letters of grandparents who've been through this experience, but not been able to provide enough evidence for a relationship. You shouldn't have to prove a relationship, but at the moment you do. And of course, it's very difficult to apply. Even if you get the court's verdict in your favour, it's very difficult to apply it. So just making the basis of the law that grandchildren have a legal right to their extended family, especially grandparents, I think would just make the balance, put the balance in the right place, in the fair place.
Esther Ranson, thank you very much indeed for coming back.
Thank you, and it's all Jane's fault, but I think the emotion she described was so intense.
Thank you for speaking to us this morning again, Esther, and we'll see you again. Thank you very much. Dame Esther Ranson, bringing us to 9:35. We've more on splits, we've our election generals, and we've a full news review with Suzanne Evans, Yasmin Alibi-Brown and Tom Fort, who is the rugby fan who will address the Wales-England result summed up in the papers as England slain